Prince Harry and his last remaining genuine charity project, the Invictus Games. But is it really a charity project at all?
The Invictus Games has suffered its greatest blow yet, and that is a decision by Australia to remove all funding from their team.
In this case, we're not dealing with the smartest person in the world. We know that from all the things we've seen. Seriously, she's not.
Yeah.
You know, she's nice and she's smart. I mean, she can get along in the world by herself.
Invictus doesn't pay for anything, for squat. What is happening?
Didn't show the children's faces, but we somehow are trying to convey that the children are having the time of their lives.
Through Meghan's faces, she shows us her like giggly over them. It's like so weird.
For years, Prince Harry insisted that one institution still represented his truest purpose. One mission that existed beyond palace politics, beyond memoirs, beyond streaming contracts, beyond carefully staged interviews, and beyond every headline that followed his life after leaving Britain, and that mission was the Invictus Games, the project he repeatedly described as his heart, his legacy, and perhaps the last remaining bridge between the prince he once was and the global figure he was still trying to become. But this week, something happened that may have changed everything. Not with a press conference, not with a public confrontation, not with cameras, but with a single government budget decision from Australia. And by the time the numbers became public, people close to the organization were already asking a far more dangerous question. Was this simply a funding cut? Or was this the beginning of something much bigger?
The Australian government decided for 3 years, ending this year, to fund the Invictus Games at about their version of it, like kind of Australia's team and those sorts of things, at about $3 million a year. So they did that. But for the 2027-2028 fiscal budget, they're like, yeah, no, we're not giving any money to this anymore.
Because when Australia quietly drew a line through millions in federal support connected to Invictus-linked veteran programs, the message was impossible to ignore, and inside royal circles, inside media circles, and even inside veteran communities, one phrase began appearing again and again. Why now? And more importantly, what do they know? For nearly a decade, Australia had been one of the strongest public supporters of the Invictus movement, investing millions, promoting recovery through sport, showcasing wounded servicemen and women, and standing proudly beside the mission that Prince Harry built from the ground up. Which is exactly why this decision landed like a political earthquake. Because governments do not casually walk away from high-profile international veteran initiatives without months of internal review, financial analysis, policy consultation, and strategic forecasting, and when Australia's latest federal budget was finally released, observers immediately noticed something missing. The money.
Gone.
No dramatic announcement. No emotional farewell. No explanation from a podium. Just silence. And a missing line in the budget. That silence may be the loudest warning yet. Because within hours of the numbers surfacing, analysts began digging deeper, journalists began comparing prior allocations, and insiders began connecting that had previously been dismissed as isolated criticism. And suddenly, this story stopped being about sport. It stopped being about veterans. And it started becoming about accountability. Because once the first financial documents started circulating, another uncomfortable reality began emerging, one that nobody inside the Sussex media machine could easily explain away.
For many veterans, Invictus Australia is not just a recreational outlet. It is a lifeline. Michael Hartung, the CEO of Invictus Australia, says, removing this funding removes access to proven pathways for recovery. With demand already outstripping our capacity, this decision risks pushing vulnerable veterans and their families further into isolation. If we are truly committed to veteran well-being, support for this work must continue so that we can keep delivering evidence-backed impact at scale.
How does an organization built to honor wounded veterans continue operating with budgets that grow larger every cycle, while questions surrounding athlete support, travel costs, accommodation expenses, sponsorship withdrawals, and event overhead continue multiplying? That question was no longer being whispered. It was now being asked publicly. And for Prince Harry, that timing could not be worse. Because only days before the funding story exploded, both Harry and Meghan Markle had once again positioned themselves front and center around the Invictus brand, appearing polished, smiling for cameras, carefully projecting unity, purpose, and relevance. But politics doesn't care about photo opportunities. Budgets don't care about branding. And governments definitely do not move millions based on public relations. Which means if Australia pulled back now, something changed. And that is where this story becomes genuinely uncomfortable. Because Australia may not even be the first.
Statement from the Veterans Affairs Minister, Matt, says the government thanks Invictus Australia for their effective work supporting the veteran community. Since coming to government, we've made the biggest investment in DVA in 30 years, including some $18.1 billion worth of funding for medical services for veterans and their families, including mental health and well-being support.
Quietly, behind the scenes, other sponsors had already begun stepping away. Corporate names that once proudly associated themselves with the Invictus mission were suddenly absent from new promotional materials. Renewal agreements were becoming harder to secure, and insiders were starting to describe fundraising conversations using one word no charity ever wants attached to its name: difficult. And if that word sounds harmless, wait until you hear what financial investigators began comparing next.
Australia continues to grapple with the findings of the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran ending their lives. This decision represents a serious step backwards in the nation's commitment to veterans' well-beings. We continue to lose 6 veterans a month to a sad state of ending their own lives. 52% of Australian veteran families have experienced mental health challenges in the past 12 months. Veterans who remain physically active have a 40% higher likelihood of overcoming mental health challenges. Invictus Australia's sport-based, community-led approach can contribute to addressing 34 of the Royal Commission's 122 recommendations for a stronger early intervention, social connection, and holistic.
Because when independent commentators placed Invictus operating costs beside other veteran sporting initiatives around the world, the numbers didn't just look high, they looked staggering. Some comparisons suggested similar veteran programs were operating at a fraction of the cost. Others raised questions about executive spending. Others began asking where sponsor money was actually being allocated. And once those questions started, they didn't stop. Not in Australia, not in Canada, not in Britain, and certainly not online. Because while critics were studying spreadsheets, social media was studying something else entirely. Meghan Markle, her positioning, her appearances, her visibility, her role. And what began as funding scrutiny was now evolving into something far more personal, far more emotional, and potentially far more damaging than any budget cut. Because for many viewers, one moment involving Meghan Markle raised a question that no public relations team ever wants trending. Was this still really about veterans, or had it quietly become something else entirely? And if you thought the funding cut was the real story, what investigators uncovered next would make that missing money look like only the beginning. But if you thought the funding cut from Australia was the headline that would define this week, what happened next turned an uncomfortable political decision into something far more dangerous, because once the first questions about missing government support began circulating, journalists, financial commentators, veteran advocates, and even longtime supporters of the Invictus Games began doing something that, until recently, almost nobody had dared to do in public. They started comparing the numbers. And once those numbers were placed side by side, the conversation changed almost instantly. Because for years, the public image surrounding Invictus had been remarkably powerful, carefully built around emotional recovery, wounded servicemen and women overcoming unimaginable obstacles, international unity, military resilience, and the deeply personal connection between Prince Harry and the veterans whose stories gave the Games their purpose. It was a formula that worked. It created admiration. It attracted sponsors. It silenced critics. And perhaps most importantly, it made people reluctant to ask difficult financial questions, because nobody wants to look like the person questioning an organization that exists to support wounded veterans. But budgets do not respond to emotion. Spreadsheets do not care about public sympathy. And when independent analysts began examining recent operating costs connected to Invictus events, one uncomfortable reality started becoming impossible to ignore. The numbers were enormous. Not slightly high. Not mildly concerning. Enormous. Millions flowing through a sporting initiative designed to serve a relatively focused number of competitors, international delegations, support staff, promotional teams, media operations, venue coordination, hospitality logistics, security arrangements, travel planning, branding campaigns, executive administration, sponsor activations, and public engagement programs. On paper, it sounded impressive. In practice, some observers believed it looked excessive. And that was before the comparison started. Because once commentators began placing Invictus spending beside other veteran-focused sporting initiatives across North America, Europe, and Commonwealth nations, the gap wasn't just noticeable. It was staggering. Programs supporting similar communities, similar rehabilitation goals, similar athletic participation were reportedly operating on fractions of the cost. Some by half, some by a quarter, some by even less. And suddenly, a question that had once seemed politically untouchable was now being asked openly across television panels, independent media channels, veteran forums, and social media platforms. Where exactly was all the money going? And once that question appeared, it spread like wildfire. Because critics were no longer talking about one isolated budget decision from Australia. They were talking about a pattern involving rising costs, a pattern involving disappearing sponsors, a pattern involving increasingly polished celebrity appearances, and a pattern involving an organization that seemed, at least to some critics, to be becoming more expensive at exactly the moment public accountability was becoming harder to avoid. That alone would have created a serious public relations headache for Prince Harry. But then another layer entered the conversation. And this layer was far more personal. Because once people started revisiting footage from recent Invictus events, they noticed something that had been hiding in plain sight for months. Camera positioning, walking order, media focus, red carpet entrances, stage access, photo lines, press angles. And suddenly, viewers weren't just analyzing financial statements anymore. They were analyzing who the cameras seemed to follow. Again, and again, and again. And in an era where every public appearance is instantly clipped, slowed down, reposted, zoomed in, and dissected frame by frame, critics began asking a deeply uncomfortable question. When the cameras arrived, who exactly was the main event? The veterans or Meghan Markle? That question may sound harsh, but online it exploded. Because some clips appeared to show the Sussex brand positioned front and center, while wounded servicemen and women, the very people whose courage built the movement, seemed increasingly pushed into the background of their own story. Fair or unfair, that perception matters. Because public trust is not destroyed overnight. It erodes, quietly, gradually, one headline at a time, one budget cut at a time, one sponsor at a time, one awkward camera moment at a time. And by now, even longtime supporters were beginning to admit that something felt different. Something felt heavier. Something felt more corporate, more polished, more managed, and perhaps less authentic. Which brings us to the question nobody inside the Sussex circle wanted surfacing at this exact moment. Because while public analysts were studying the spending, while governments were reviewing the budgets, while online audiences were dissecting every frame, private sponsors were quietly making decisions of their own. And when some of those names began disappearing from renewal conversations, the alarm bells inside Invictus reportedly became impossible to ignore. Because governments walking away creates headlines. But when corporations start walking away, that creates panic. And what happened behind closed doors next may explain why Prince Harry suddenly found himself facing questions that had nothing to do with royalty, and everything to do with survival. Because just as the financial pressure started building, Meghan Markle stepped back into the spotlight. And what viewers noticed next turned an accounting story into a full-blown image crisis. But if the financial scrutiny surrounding the Invictus Games was beginning to make people uncomfortable, what happened next may have created an even deeper problem for Prince Harry, because money can always be explained with reports, budgets, accounting reviews, and carefully worded statements, but public perception operates by an entirely different set of rules. And once millions of people begin forming emotional conclusions from what they see with their own eyes, reversing that momentum becomes infinitely harder than balancing any spreadsheet. That shift began quietly, almost invisibly, through short video clips, social media reposts, audience reactions, slow-motion breakdowns, and frame-by-frame comparisons that, on their own, may have seemed harmless, but together began creating a narrative that neither the Sussex media team nor supporters of the Invictus movement could easily ignore, because suddenly the public was no longer talking only about missing funding, rising operational costs, or sponsorship uncertainty. They were talking about visibility. They were talking about positioning. They were talking about presence. And more importantly than anything else, they were talking about focus. Because at an event originally created to honor wounded servicemen and women, to celebrate resilience, recovery, sacrifice, and the extraordinary strength of veterans rebuilding their lives after unimaginable physical and emotional trauma, some viewers began asking a question that no charity, no nonprofit organization, and certainly no global public figure ever wants becoming part of the conversation. Who exactly was standing at the center of this story now? For years, the answer had always felt obvious. The veterans, the competitors, the families, the recovery journeys, the human stories that gave the games their purpose and their emotional power. But as newer footage began circulating online, as older appearances were revisited, and as audiences started comparing event after event with a level of scrutiny that modern social media makes almost unavoidable, some viewers began noticing patterns that, once recognized, became difficult to unsee. They noticed who the cameras followed. They noticed who photographers waited for. They noticed who walked first. They noticed who occupied the center of group photographs. They noticed who received extended applause. They noticed whose reactions were repeatedly highlighted. And before long, one name began dominating those conversations: Meghan Markle. Now, fairness matters here, because in any public event involving globally recognized figures, media attention naturally follows celebrity, status, and public curiosity, and nobody can entirely control where cameras point or what clips social media chooses to amplify. But public perception does not wait for nuance, and once audiences begin connecting moments together, once isolated clips start forming a larger emotional narrative, facts alone often struggle to catch up. And that appears to be exactly what started happening. Because viewers were no longer reacting to one photograph. They were no longer reacting to one speech. They were no longer reacting to one appearance. Instead, they were reacting to a pattern of entrances, a pattern of stage positioning, a pattern of media focus, a pattern of public moments that, fairly or unfairly, led some longtime supporters of the games to ask whether the emotional center of Invictus was beginning to shift away from the people it was built to serve. And if that perception sounds harsh, what made it far more dangerous was not the criticism itself. It was who began repeating it. Not anonymous trolls, not gossip pages, not random internet accounts looking for clicks, but veterans, former supporters, longtime royal watchers, commentators who had spent years defending Prince Harry as the one royal who truly understood military service, trauma recovery, and the quiet emotional battles that so many wounded servicemen face long after the uniforms come off. When voices like that begin asking uncomfortable questions, organizations pay attention. Because criticism from opponents can be dismissed. A criticism from loyal supporters cannot. And inside the Sussex circle, that shift may have felt deeply personal, because Invictus was never supposed to be another entertainment platform, another branding exercise, or another carefully managed celebrity event. For Harry, Invictus was supposed to be legacy. It was supposed to be the project nobody could take away from him, the mission nobody could politicize, the achievement that would outlive interviews, documentaries, memoirs, and every headline that followed his departure from royal life. Which is exactly why the timing of this public conversation could not have been worse. Because just as Australia had stepped back financially, just as analysts were questioning operational spending, just as private sponsors were quietly reviewing future commitments, social media was now adding something far harder to control than budgets: emotion, perception, doubt. And in modern public life, doubt spreads faster than any official statement ever can. But if online criticism was beginning to create pressure around the Sussex brand, what was happening quietly behind corporate doors may have been far more serious, because while millions of viewers were debating photographs, clips, and public appearances, some of the companies that helped keep Invictus financially alive were beginning to ask a much more dangerous question. Not whether the games still mattered, but whether association with the people leading them still made business sense. And once that question started being asked inside corporate boardrooms, private donor meetings, sponsorship reviews, and long-term strategic planning sessions, the pressure surrounding the Invictus Games may have shifted from uncomfortable to existential, because public criticism can usually be managed, online controversy eventually moves on, and even negative headlines can be softened through visibility, messaging, and carefully timed appearances. But when the people who write the checks begin reviewing not just the mission but the personalities attached to that mission, the conversation changes in ways that no public relations campaign can easily control. For years, the Invictus brand represented something remarkably powerful in the world of global philanthropy because it brought together military service, human resilience, international unity, and one deeply recognizable public figure in the form of Prince Harry, a former soldier whose personal connection to veterans gave the movement an authenticity that few organizations could ever manufacture through branding alone. That authenticity mattered. It attracted governments. It attracted media. It attracted corporate partnerships. It attracted public goodwill. And perhaps most importantly of all, it attracted trust. Because when companies decide where to invest millions in sponsorships, partnerships, promotional campaigns, hospitality activations, and long-term social responsibility initiatives, they are not simply investing in events, venues, logos, and press coverage. They are investing in credibility, public sentiment, emotional association, and the belief that the story attached to their brand will strengthen their reputation rather than create unpredictable risk. For a long time, Invictus offered exactly that. But reputations do not remain frozen in time. They evolve, they expand, and sometimes they become complicated. Because over the last several years, the public identity of Prince Harry has become increasingly tied not only to veterans and service, but also to memoir controversies, televised interviews, family conflict, legal battles, media accusations, security disputes, documentary releases, and headlines that, whether fair or unfair, have made him one of the most polarizing public figures in the world. And companies notice that, not emotionally, not politically, not personally, but commercially. Because every major sponsor studies audience sentiment, digital engagement, demographic reactions, media volatility, public trust indicators, controversy patterns, and long-term brand exposure before deciding whether an association still creates value. And once those reports begin showing increased division, increased reputational unpredictability, and increased audience polarization, the internal conversation inevitably becomes more difficult. Not because the mission has changed, but because the environment around the mission has changed. That distinction matters. Because no corporation wants to be seen walking away from wounded veterans. But corporations absolutely will reconsider whether the personalities representing that mission still align with their long-term public image. And if that conversation had already started quietly behind closed doors, the increasing visibility of Meghan Markle around recent Invictus appearances may have added another layer of complexity that executives, analysts, and risk assessment teams simply could not ignore. Not because visibility itself is a problem. Not because celebrity automatically creates controversy. But because in the world of sponsorship economics, perception often becomes reality, and once audiences begin questioning whether a charitable mission still feels centered on its intended beneficiaries, the companies attached to that mission begin asking the same question. Sometimes quietly, sometimes slowly, but always seriously. That may explain why people closely watching sponsorship movements began noticing something subtle, but deeply important, because names that once appeared proudly alongside Invictus branding were no longer being discussed with the same confidence. Renewal conversations reportedly became slower, fundraising projections became harder to forecast, and long-term commercial planning suddenly required a level of reassurance that successful organizations rarely need to provide. And when reassurance becomes part of fundraising, confidence has already started shifting. For Prince Harry, that may be the most painful part of this entire story because of all the projects, all the public appearances, all the interviews, all the books, all the documentaries, and all the headlines that have followed him since stepping away from royal life, Invictus remained the one institution that even many critics were willing to respect. It was the one project people believed came from genuine service. It was the one mission that felt untouched by palace politics. It was the one achievement that seemed bigger than controversy. Which means if public trust around Invictus begins shifting, the consequences become personal. Very personal. Because this is no longer about media narratives. This is no longer about internet criticism. This is no longer about another difficult headline. This is about legacy. And while pressure was quietly building around sponsorships, public perception, and long-term financial sustainability, something else was unfolding thousands of miles away that would make the comparison even harder for the Sussex camp to ignore, because at almost the exact same moment questions were growing around Invictus. Another member of the royal family stepped onto the international stage and reminded the world what carefully built institutional trust actually looks like. And when Catherine, Princess of Wales, appeared before international crowds, the contrast was not subtle. It was immediate. It was visual. And for millions watching around the world, it was unforgettable. And perhaps that is what makes this entire week so extraordinary, because while questions continued building around the financial future of the Invictus Games, while sponsorship conversations reportedly became more cautious, while public scrutiny around optics, branding, and long-term trust continued growing louder, another image was quietly dominating headlines across Europe, across Commonwealth media, and across royal coverage worldwide, and that image belonged to Catherine, Princess of Wales. There were no dramatic interviews. There were no emotional explanations. There were no carefully leaked stories. There were no documentaries asking viewers to choose sides. Instead, there was something far more powerful: preparation, discipline, presence, and, perhaps most importantly of all, silence backed by confidence. Because when Catherine stepped onto that international stage, meeting children, greeting families, speaking with local communities, standing with educators, charity leaders, and public officials, the reaction was immediate, not because the world had forgotten how royal duty looks, but because in an age dominated by noise, conflict, personal branding, and endless public explanations, genuine institutional confidence suddenly felt rare again. And audiences noticed. Journalists noticed. Sponsors noticed. Governments noticed. Because trust does not need to announce itself. Trust simply shows up. And that may be the most uncomfortable comparison facing Prince Harry and Meghan Markle right now. Because while one royal narrative appeared to be spending this week answering questions, defending optics, navigating funding scrutiny, and managing increasingly complicated public perception, another royal narrative appeared to be doing something far simpler: serving, quietly, confidently, consistently. And in modern public life, consistency often speaks louder than any interview ever could. For Harry, that reality may be especially painful because of everything he has built since stepping away from royal life, of every project he has launched, every platform he has joined, every headline he has generated, and every public battle he has chosen to fight. The Invictus Games remained the one mission that even critics often respected, the one achievement that felt deeply personal, deeply authentic, and deeply connected to the version of Harry that millions of people once admired. Which means if governments begin stepping away, if sponsors begin asking harder questions, if public trust begins shifting, and if even longtime supporters begin wondering where the focus truly lies, then this may no longer be a temporary controversy. This may be the beginning of the most important crossroads in Harry's public life. Because institutions can survive criticism, brands can survive bad headlines, even public figures can survive controversy. But trust, once it starts moving, rarely moves quietly. So the question now is no longer whether Australia pulled funding. The real question is what happens next. Will Prince Harry fight to pull Invictus back toward its original mission? Will Meghan Markle step further into the spotlight or step back entirely? Will sponsors renew their confidence or quietly walk away? And perhaps most importantly of all, can a legacy built on service survive an era increasingly defined by scrutiny? I want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe Invictus Games is facing a temporary storm, Or are we watching the beginning of a much bigger turning point for Prince Harry? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because this conversation is only getting started. And if you enjoyed deep royal analysis, documentary storytelling, and the stories behind the headlines, make sure you subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us, because the next chapter in this story may be closer than anyone thinks.